Tonight we have 10 stories, from stories of cryptids and even the scariest of them all, car salesmen, and much more. If you have a story of your own, it can be sent to reddit.com/r/slumberreads. These videos do take me quite a bit of time to create, and I've been creating a lot of them lately. So if you enjoy, a simple like goes a very, very long way. If you want to help support the content, that's the best way to do so. If you're new to the channel and you like what you hear, please be sure to subscribe. I post stuff like this all of the time, and I would love to have you on board. Enjoy the video, and as always, I hope you all have a great night. I'm a car salesman. Not necessarily by choice, it's something that just kind of fell into place. I work at a local dealer near the mall in town, one my dad's been running since before I was born. He loves cars and he loves to sell them, I guess, which sums up about why I work there. It's not a bad gig, and I've been doing it long enough to get pretty good at it. I've had some pretty good sales in the past. Some felt a little scummier than others, but hey, the way the trade works. I don't make much money if the cars don't sell, so it's in my best interest to do so. I was sitting at my desk when it started. It was a decent, but overall a slow day at the lot. The weather was nice, but I didn't get much of a chance to enjoy it because I hadn't had any sales all day. Not one. No young couple looking for a cheap ride. No bachelor looking for a lifted truck or sports car. No family scouting a replacement minivan. Nothing. So I spent most of the day at my desk, twiddling my thumbs, listening to the radio, eyeing the lot in case someone happened to wander over. I was ready to get a sale, be productive instead of sitting around. My dad was out for the day. Something about a golf outing with a competitor. Love that stuff. Since I had the building to myself, I was hoping to put in some decent numbers, but on this particular day, there was no one. I've had a lot on my mind recently, and the business would help clear the chaos in my head. So there I sat, dicking around as the hours crept by. That was until he showed up. I watched him arrive by bus, getting off the shuttle at the stop through the window. I had nothing going on, so I watched him after he showed up. He got off the bus and looked straight at the dealership. A slow, almost limp of a walk starting as soon as he saw my building. My first thought of him was your stereotypical boomer dad. Had to be pushing 60. What was left of his wispy hair has gelled and combed across a colossal bald spot. His eyes were shielded by bronze aviator glasses, and his outfit looked like it was ripped straight from an 80s business catalog. Khakis and old leather shoes, a floral print button-up that barely contained a large beer belly, and a Navy members only jacket to tie it all together. He had his hands stuffed in his pockets of the jacket, and he was on a mission. While he drove closer to the dealer, I combed my hair, spit out my gum, and straightened my tie. It was evident he was coming this way, but he was heading straight to the lot, probably to browse. I just took that as my cue to meet him. I pushed through the door and into the sunlight, feeling the breeze for the first time today. He was just standing there now, scanning. He didn't linger on anything very long. I would have to do some digging to get this sale moving. How are we doing today? I asked. The name's Mark. I'll be your liaison today. Something I can help you find? He just stood there ignoring me for a second, looking at the cars at his own uninterrupted pace. With the aviators and the double chin, he looked like a grumpy frog. There was something unsettling about him from the get-go. I'm looking for a car, he said. Can't seem to find it. This is my third dealer today. He said plainly, very to the point. I clapped my hands together, ready to start the routine I had done 100 times. Well, this is your lucky day. We currently have an abundance of... I'm not here for the sales pitch, kid. He cut me off, taking slow steps toward the shiny hatchbacks. Well, certainly there's some way I can help. I know all the makes and models in this lot. We happen to be sitting on quite a bit, and let me tell you, now is a good time to be on the market. I started, turning around to face the luxury sedans. Were you looking for something sleek, or cruising, or maybe something a little sportier? Surely an old top like yourself would. Turned back to see he was already walking away. Felt a twinge of frustration. I'd have to work a little harder to get this guy to play ball. I scratched my head and caught up with him, walking quicker so I could lead. The mini SUVs are one of our most popular items. Plenty of room for passengers. Cargo in the back. All-wheel drive, too. I can't recommend that enough. You know how winter can be around here, I said. The man just looked ahead, chewing his lip a little. The wind blew at his comb strands, but he didn't seem to mind. Heated seats, Bluetooth. Some of these even have TVs in them. They make the commute more enjoyable. Satisfying. No interest on the first 12 months if you buy before the fall. We're at the tail end of our summer sale, but there's still time. Even if you need time to think something over, I'll get you taken care of. What do you do for a living, if you don't mind me asking? Finally, he looked my direction, but his face was still blank. Almost like stone. I was a car salesman. I'm retired now. He kept walking. Gotta be fucking kidding me. I thought to myself, this guy already knew the game. The tactics wouldn't work here. I'd have to follow him around like a lost dog and lap up whatever he fed if I wanted any kind of sale today. We could be here all day, and he still might not get anything. I kept the enthusiasm going. You don't say. Anywhere around here? Maybe you know my father? I asked. The man had finally stopped at our little cluster of trade-ins from past transactions. The man looked them over one by one, the sun shining of his sunglasses as he panned slowly like an owl. He came to an old Buick and stopped, fumbling in the pockets of his windbreaker. He pulled out a pack of cigarettes and a Zippo. Sir, I'm afraid I'm going to have to ask you to put those away. We have a smoke-free premises, I said, but he continued anyway. He leisurely fished a cigarette out of the pack and lit it, taking a big drag before pointing to the Buick. The LeSabre. Give me the keys. He blew the smoke out at me and I waved it away. I looked at the car, a creeping anxiety washing over me. It was a 98 Buick LeSabre Limited, silver with tinted windows. This car, of all things, was this a game? Pardon? A trade-in? I assure you we can find something better to suit you. Walk with me. There's quite a bit I can show you. What's the deal with the price? $8,000? It blew books for 5 tops. I know you heard me. Get the fucking keys. He looked at me and took another drag. His tonal shift was alarming. I found myself glancing around. We were still alone. Yes. Right away. Let me get those for you. I briskly returned to the office for the keys. I was sweating a little, trying to wrap my head around the old man's choice. The LeSabre of all cars. Thought about calling my dad, but decided against it. He would flip out, ask too many questions, want to know every little detail about what was going on. When I came back, he was peering through the windows of the car, his cigarette snubbed out on the pavement. I wanted to scowl at it, but I kept cool. I still wanted to get something out of this guy. I just had to figure out how. Looks clean. Really clean, he said as he peered through the driver's side window. They all are, I said, scratching the back of my head as I looked across the lot. The SUVs wouldn't do it. He was too old for a really smart car. I had a feeling the digital stuff would scare him away. Maybe the Lincolns. The old man was looking at the paper that was taped to the inside of the windshield. The one below the large for sale sign. It displayed the mileage and terms of sale. As is, no warranty, stuff like that. It was a trade-in after all. Well, let's take a look, shall we? He was leaning on the car now, waiting for me to unlock it. Sure thing. I smiled and worked the key, looking inside myself to make sure nothing was amiss. The front seat floors were still covered with paper shields to ward off shoe scuffs, and the back seat was nice and clean, just as I hoped. Here she is. I reluctantly held the door for him, and he ducked his head in. It was hard to tell what he was thinking. It was those damn sunglasses. You couldn't see anything behind them. He chewed his lip as he looked up and down the dash, then his gaze held on the seats. They were tan leather, a clean shine still catching the light. Leather seats, very clean. Back in my day, these used to drive the girls wild, he said under his breath, and I started to feel uncomfortable. So many skirts in these back seats. He clicked his tongue and ran a finger down the clean leather. He looked at his fingertip and rubbed it against his thumb as if trying to feel dirt. Oh yeah? Is that so? I played along, wiping sweat from my brow. Yes, of course, he continued. You ever get a dame in the back seat of one of these, kid? He asked, a grin forming on his wrinkled, stubbled chin. It gave me the chills. I'm afraid not. I gave a nervous laugh. Say, a few rows down we have the Lincoln Town Car. A few of them, actually. Even in silver, too. Of course, he wasn't listening. With a labored wheeze, he leaned in and hit the button for the trunk. There was a soft clink when the trunk popped, and he immediately walked around me toward the rear of the car. He stood in front of the trunk with it cracked a little, as if he didn't want to open it. He ran his thumb over the paint, then over the temporary license plate. When his thumb reached the dealership sticker, he stopped for a moment. The sticker was the silhouette of a diamond. He looked at me, still frowning. There it is. Namesake of the business. You know, diamond deals. It was my dad's idea. I still think it's pretty cheesy if I'm being honest, I said, unable to shake the feeling of nervousness. The old man seemed taken aback. Yeah, there's that. He looked at the sign, then lifted the lid of the trunk. As he stared in the trunk, I found myself following and looking as well. The same silent stare. The trunk was empty, and there was a clear view to the little carpet hatch that led to the spare. The old man ran a finger over the carpet. Plenty of room in there, isn't there? He asked. He was looking tired. Perhaps the sun was getting to him. Yeah, I suppose there is. Good going to town car. I guess. Plenty of room for groceries. Or a woman. He spoke. Stood the hair up on the back of my neck. Excuse me? I asked. You heard me. He looked at me, then slammed the trunk shut. It was loud and I jumped a little. Sir, I think it's time I asked you to leave. I stammered, feeling a ball in my throat. I instinctively felt for my phone, and the old man stared and scratched at his stubbled chin. Leave? Who said I was leaving? I'm not finished here. He pushed past me and walked back to the driver's side. He dug in his pocket again, this time pulling a full half pint of whiskey. He twisted the cap and broke the seal before taking a swig. I could only watch in disbelief. Hey, I don't know what the hell you think you're doing, but it's time for you to go. I'm calling the police. I pulled out my phone while he screwed the cap back on. Don't worry, I'll call them, he said, pocketing the whiskey and pulling out his own flip phone. What? I asked. I said I'll call them. Don't worry about it, kid, I'll handle it. He flipped his phone open. I mulled it over in my head, sweating more and more as my confusion built. Oh, wait, that's not necessary. We can figure something out, I'm sure. I put mine away and held my hands up. The old grumpy man looked at me, and after a time his phone snapped shut. He dug out another cigarette and lit it. I scratched my sweaty head and looked around, but it was just on the lot. When's the last time you drove this, kid? He asked. What? The Buick. You ever take her for a spin? After hours? When Daddy's not looking? He growled, his voice getting lower like he was whispering. What? No, I've never driven this car before. I told him. Huh, that's funny. All of these cars in the lot, and the only one without dust on the paint is this one. Still got shine on the tires. Why you spray that on there? Pretty it up. Why do that if it's overpriced? You only pretty up the frontliners, kid. He was moving closer, the cigarette smoke dancing on the wind. I told you, I haven't driven this car, only around the lot like the others. Another thing, kid, the paper on the window said it got 130,715 miles. He rasped. Yeah, and? I demanded. Dash says 747. He took another drag. So what? The Carfax is off then. It's 32 miles, who gives a shit? I'll print out a new one. I told you the cars get moved around. Yeah, maybe a block or so. Unless there's a maintenance issue. But you know what? There's a couple of bars in town. Only a few miles away. You ever take her out for a spin, kid? Clean her up? Impress the girls? He was taking another drink. My hands were starting to shake. I don't know what you're talking about, I said. Sure you don't. Let me tell you a story, kid. Real quick. Like I said, I was a salesman too. I get it. I was there once. I was damn good too. But I tell you what else. I was a total piece of shit husband. And a worse father. I didn't give a damn about my kid. Not really. They were just things that happened. The cars, on the other hand, I lived for those cars. That's what I loved. Got divorced a long time ago. Me and the wife never talk. My daughter, she must be a little younger than you, he said. He was talking much faster now, raising his voice. Anyway, my ex calls me yesterday. We haven't spoken in years. She tells me our kid hasn't come home. She thinks she's missing. She said to call the cops. They didn't do shit as far as I know. Yeah, so what? What's that got to do with me, huh? I was getting loud, my voice echoing in the lot. I could feel the anxiety settling in. Thing is, her date picked her up that night, like a gentleman. Car all done up, spick and span. Was the last time she saw her. Said he was driving an old silver Buick. Said there was a sticker on the bumper. Like a symbol. She wasn't sure. It was dark out, but as it turns out, on the third dealer I found it. I looked at the large spinning sign. The glimmering letters, Diamond Deals. I couldn't breathe. So I think it's time to come clean. He took a last drag and snubbed it out. I don't know what you're talking about. Yeah, I think you do. Maybe your daddy ain't quite figured it out, but he will. You know you mark the price up on that car to keep the eyes off of it. Fuck you. I clenched my fists. Sure, you only put a couple miles on. Bar's not that far, but I tell you what. You know what else isn't far away? The river. You could be there in 10 minutes. So what happened, kid? You pushed too far? She rejects you? You're wrong, I said, tears welling in my eyes. No, I'm not. This car is probably the cleanest on the lot. It's been vacuumed at least 3 times. And the outside's shiny and new. You don't wash the trade-ins, kid. They're not worth the effort. How long till Daddy finds out? You think he'll like that? You messing up that bad? It was an accident, was all I said. Brat like yourself. Maybe not used to hearing the word no. She hurt your feelings. Take you down a peg? Big man like yourself? I told you it was an accident. I felt my knees buckling. Suddenly it was hard to stand. Sure thing, kid. I'm gonna cut to the chase. Calling the cops either way. Either now or when I'm on the way home on the next bus. They'll take everything I know and they'll find her. Wherever she is. But it ain't gonna be quick. They'll drag you and your father through the mud through the whole process. You'll be finished. He said, and my legs could no longer hold the weight of the stress and guilt. I started sobbing, burying my face in my hands. What do you want me to do? I can't undo what I've done. At some point, he was standing next to me, getting one last thing from his pockets. Through tears and shame, I could see the pistol. A little .38 snub nose. I won't lie and tell you I was there for my daughter growing up. I wasn't. I know that. But she was still my daughter. I'm just doing what's right. It's the least I can do. But I'm no killer. You want to know what I want you to do? Atone for your mistake. Make sure it doesn't happen again. Seems like a better alternative to carrying the weight and rotting in prison, don't it? Either way, it's up to you. I did my part. He said and held the gun out. I took it and cradled it in my trembling hands. The old man sighed, retrieved the whiskey and downed it in a large gulp. He winced behind his glasses and there was a glimmer of a tear behind the lens. He tossed the bottle into the parking lot and walked away, lighting a cigarette without another word. Through puffy eyes, I watched him go. The same limp taking him to the bus stop he arrived on. Without as much as a look, he sat on the bench and waited for the next shuttle. I climbed to my feet and went back in the office. I collected my things and locked up for the day, closing the dealership early. When I came back out, he was gone. The bus bench was empty, like he was never even here. The pistol in my pocket and the booze bottle in the parking lot reminded me of his visit, almost assuring me of what had to be done next. I got in the Buick and drove home. It took me some time to process it all, but by the time I got home, I knew what I had to do. I sat down and wrote this, hopefully to clear up any questions for those that come looking for me. I know I'm a piece of shit, and I did what I did. There's nothing I can do to fix that now. I'm sorry. Really. I was in denial at first, and I tried my best to cover it up because I was scared. Scared of what I did and the repercussions that would follow if it was discovered. I've got a bunch of missed calls on my phone now. Too many to go through, and to be honest, there's no need. I've made my decision. There's a little bar on the outskirts of town called the Sixth Shot, where a little red neon sign. If you head east for 8 miles or so, there's a small bridge with a river running underneath. She's under the bridge. I tried to use some rocks to weigh her down. I hope she's still there. Sorry. She deserved much better. Well, that's about all I have to say. I've learned from my mistake. I won't hurt anybody again. I got the pistol on the desk now, and once I post this, I'm going to take the deal the old man gave me. At least that way I can try and set things right. He did say he was a damn good salesman. Goodbye. I had just woken up from my nap when I heard the phone ring. Looking through the hazy curtains of my eyes, I saw that David, one of my closest friends, was calling me. I assumed he was calling about the lunch we had scheduled for the week. "Hey, what's up, man?" I said, clearing my throat. "Doing good. Listen, can you do me a favor?" I was about to agree when he cut me off and continued. "Remember Sam? She left my washer and dryer at this storage unit. Was wondering if you would help me move it to my new apartment around 7. Sam was David's ex-girlfriend. As is common in most breakups, one party's belongings always end up in storage or in a dumpster. As much as I hated the idea of moving, I had to agree given that he would have done the same for me. The agreement was conditional, of course, on pizza and beer. At 6:30 in the evening, I promptly put on my deodorant, got dressed, and popped open a can of cat food for my feline friend. I got into my truck and put in the address David had sent me into the navigation system. Predictably, it didn't recognize the address, but the truck was made 20 years ago, so this was a common occurrence. I called David and asked him to send me his location. It looked like the place itself wasn't far from me. Right off the coffee shop I'd sometimes visit when work got extremely busy. The sun was almost down, leaving behind a familiar orange glow in the Arizona clouds. I would have admired it, but the damn thing kept blinding me on the highway. In about 15 minutes, I pulled into what looked like an abandoned warehouse, fenced in with barbed wire and home to about 100 units. Almost immediately, I noticed David toying with the security system. He was easy to spot because, well, he was the only one there and his car was the most obnoxious bright green color. Can't seem to figure out this code Sam gave me. Says 88721. Why didn't you just ask her? I said, trying to be the voice of reason. If there is one thing in this world that I would rather not do again, it is talking to that scumbag. David replied. It seemed like a good enough reason to me, so I dropped that line of questioning. After trying to put in the code myself and getting an error message over and over, I started to look for cameras around the gate. Unfortunately, there weren't any. Seeing this opportunity, I mimicked a push motion to David. He immediately caught my drift and went to the other side. Miraculously, we were able to open the gate with a simple push. What kind of sketchy storage place is this? I asked. David just shrugged and got into his car. Following his lead, I jumped into my truck and we both started looking for Unit 53. The units were all painted a dull and fading gray. The color was so chipped and ancient that it reminded me of the rusted locks and chains I had seen tied to the bridge by my house. Didn't help that the layout was confusing, and that the night had almost seeped into the day. For a property of this size, I was a little stunned to see that beyond the 10 rows of cramped units, there was a great expanse of nothing, save for some tall grass and a distant tree. In the corner of my eye, I saw David flashing his lights. It looked like he had found his unit after all. I pulled over right behind him and got out of my truck. As I got out, I was hit with a very powerful stench emanating from one of the units. Jesus, what is that smell? I asked. It's so goddamn revolting. It took a minute for David to notice, but his face scowled in reaction to the rancid fumes around us. Guess someone doesn't know these things aren't climate controlled, he quipped. Between my disgust, I managed to sneak in a laugh. I looked at the unit that Sam had rented. In pale yellow lettering, it said Unit 53. I saw David trying to figure out the lock, only to find that Sam had left a plastic zip tie in place of one. He hacked the tie off with his key and pulled the shutter. Illuminated by his flashlight, I saw a washer and dryer, some old books, and 3 suitcases. Didn't look too bad of a move to me. I grabbed the dolly, and we went to work. Lifting the washer was a little tough, but this is where I thought going to the gym would pay off. On every second breath, I would put half my face into my t-shirt to get a momentary break from the foul odor. Slowly, we were able to load the damn thing onto the bed of my truck. As I was grabbing the dolly, I heard it for the first time. A loud banging of something heavy against the metal door. We froze. I turned to David, who was staring at the unit next to us. Panic set in. Suddenly, it stopped. "Man, what the fuck is that?" I asked. "Don't know, but let's get the hell out of here." He replied. I didn't need any more convincing. I got off the bed of my truck when the banging continued. It grew louder and louder and almost had the cadence and intensity of a marching band drum. The bangs were no longer coming from just one unit. It surrounded us, terrorizing us in a circle that was slowly closing in. We started running toward our cars. I felt something behind me. The washer was no longer on my truck, but about 10 feet onto the air. It hurled itself toward David. "Duck!" I yelled at the top of my lungs. The washer flew straight into David's car. There was no point in trying to drive that thing. It was totaled. David started running to get into the truck. In the barren field in front of me, I saw something move. Something that resembled a person but with glaring inaccuracies. My blood froze in its place. It was running in our direction but on all fours. David got into the truck and I hit the gas pedal as hard as I could. With David's directions, I tried to find the gate we had broken into, but it was no longer there. "Fuck, man, I swear it was here," David cried. Both of us were shaking as I turned the corner and kept driving. I don't know why I looked in the rearview mirror. Maybe I was hoping that this wasn't real, that this was just a dream. I wish I hadn't looked. Right behind us on all fours was a man, or something close to one. His skin was dried and flappy. Chunks were falling off and crumbling into the asphalt. He had a face, but not one that looked human. At least not anymore. The skin kept falling off as he was running. His bulging eyes met mine for a brief second and pierced through my soul. "I don't want to die in a storage lot," David somehow managed to whisper. After what felt like an eternity driving and dancing in circles, I saw a gate to my left. As I approached it, the banging resumed and kept getting louder. I decided to just plow through it and get on the road. I didn't have the courage to look behind me in fear of what I saw until I reached the highway. Once on the highway, I was able to peek behind me but didn't see anything, save a few cars. David and I, both shell-shocked, didn't speak until we got home. We went to my place and called the cops, who said that they would send someone out. They didn't seem convinced, but that was understandable. Still trembling, David and I sat on the couch in deafening silence. "You okay, man? What the fuck was all that?" I asked David. He didn't answer. An hour later, we got a call saying that a detective would check the place out the next day, but they didn't have any record of a storage unit at that address. Stumped by this, I thanked the operator and decided to call it a night. Dropped David off at his apartment and gave him a hug. He had still not spoken a word to me. Chalking it up to what we had just witnessed, I got in my truck. As I turned the keys in the ignition, I noticed the foul odor was back even stronger, though this time it was coming from me. Mama always said I had a knack for arguing. It was probably this mindset that got me into law school, where I spent 1 year before flunking out due to playing too many video games. Laws are tricky because There's a lot of information on them, and therefore a lot to memorize. Curses, however, don't have a lot of information on them. Curses are easier to work with, and so I ended up doing freelance work finding loopholes to help people manage their curses. And no, I don't actually argue any cases, but curse lawyer brings in more business than curse consultant. A lot of my clients come seeking to break their curse. This isn't something that I do. You'd want a witch doctor to target the curse itself, or a hitman to go after the guy who put it on you. And I am neither of those things. But put a few beers in me and I'll try both. I just help my clients cope with day-to-day life within the boundaries set by the rules of their curse. For instance, I had a lady come in with horrible skin. Like a bowl of oatmeal with raisins on top, and the raisins were oozing pus. She said that one of her exes had cursed her beauty so that she would appear as ugly on the outside as she was on the inside. And from the way she talked, she was honestly kind of a huge bitch. Now with her, we tried a few things. First, she saw a dermatologist. A few creams and laser treatments later, it was a little better, but still not pleasant to look at. Never thought I'd be thankful for the COVID mask mandate, but here we are. Then she started volunteering. Animal shelters, children's hospitals, building schools in Mexico, you name it. Cleared up her face a lot after that. But she'd gotten a little chubby from stress eating, so I wouldn't call her beautiful on the outside, but hey, she was passable on the outside. When she has a date, she gives $20 to the homeless person at the corner. She gets hotter around the holidays when she delivers turkeys to the homeless for Thanksgiving and Christmas, but it wanes during the summer when everyone's a little more grumpy during the hot weather. But we found a way for her to manage. At this point, it's probably a good idea to let you know that curses have conditions and effects, and you have to balance them to make it work. If a curse has a really easy to fulfill condition, like tying shoes, it usually has a really weak effect. They come undone within an hour. If a curse has a really difficult, specific condition, Steve the Blasphemer sets foot on the steps of St. Mary's Cathedral in Ireland, it can carry a lot stronger effect. His blood will turn into scorpion venom, because the curses of the latter sort are very unlikely to happen. I typically deal with more of the former ones. Let me introduce you to my good friend Velcro Shoe. But a specific curse can cause a lot of problems to a person if you know them really well and target their lifestyle. Steve the Blasphemer is going to have to stop banging those nuns and maybe find a different cathedral. You don't really see much of the if you tie your shoes, your heart explodes kind of curses for whatever reason. So you get the idea of what I do. But anyway, enough introduction about me. I'm actually writing this post for one of my clients. His name is Paul Wilkinson, and he's about 6 feet tall, skinny computer guy from Michigan. Remember this because it'll be important later. Paul has severe social anxiety, but you can find him on the Facebook I made for him. Just type in his name. His family's dead, lives on a trust fund, and he has basically no friends. He spends most of his day arguing on forums such as this one, and because of that, he was cursed with one of the more specific curses, in that if, at any point, nobody remembers him, he will die. Thankfully, he got to me before his roommate moved away. Bad news, Paul is really boring. Very easily forgettable. I had to write down his name in my planner, and my memory's not the best either. Why do you think I use a planner? The good news? There's a lot of you who read this subreddit. Thanks for taking care of Paul. If you ever need any curse loopholes, you can leave a message in this thread. I charge reasonable prices. I'm a journalist that mainly does work between South Carolina and North Carolina. Originally from South Carolina, I preferred the North Carolina scenery and people. For my work, I normally write about normal everyday things. Weather, obituaries, even about cats stuck in trees. I loved my job. I loved writing. It was my passion. Then again, there are stories some people don't want to write about. I was in the southern part of North Carolina one day, getting information about a law firm that was shutting down. Supposedly they represented a businessman that got caught trying to illegally sell protected land in the mountains. The firm lost, of course, and the man went to jail. All I was trying to do was get some kind of story out of it. The other news sites had gotten there earlier than me, beating me to the fresher story. I got nothing but the scraps. The law firm didn't give me much, but they were more annoyed by me showing up. Figured, since hundreds of those reporters or journalists came asking the same questions. I was willing to give up at that point, deciding to put something about a hero cop in the paper. I went to a local cafe and sat by the large windows. I looked over my notes as I waited for my coffee. Nothing was adding up about the law firm. From the little bit of notes I had, I flipped the page in my notebook and stopped. There in my handwriting was DuPont State Park. Weird, I thought. I tried racking my brain to try and remember why I wrote that down. When I was trying to remember, someone sat down across from me. I quickly looked up, knowing I wasn't meeting anyone. The person that sat across from me had a sweatshirt on, with the hood up. Weird, I thought. They looked over their shoulder before speaking. "I know what you're looking for," they said. I was about to object, saying I knew nothing they were talking about. "Don't think I already know what you're doing. You're digging yourself a hole that you can't climb out of." The stranger spoke, reaching into their bag and pulling out a manila folder. There were several papers inside. Sliding the folder to me, the stranger went and stood. They turned back to me, saying, "Do your job and do it right. Just don't get yourself killed." Get myself killed? What were they talking about? With that, they left me there staring at a folder I didn't want to open. Curiosity got the better of me and I opened the folder after leaving the cafe. I sat in my car, the engine not on yet. The first page in the folder had whole paragraphs written on it. So did some of the others, but they seemed more like government documents, rather than a regular typed paragraph a college student would write. Several words were redacted. Odd, I thought, flipping through the other pages. I stopped after finding a newspaper clipping from a few months ago. It was about a man who was admitted to a mental hospital saying he was being stalked by some creature of some kind. A shiver ran down my spine. I heard about this. It didn't make big headlines, though. Not many mental illness cases actually do. But why was this in there? I continued reading. It said the man was involved in a motorcycle crash on the parkway in the Brevard area. He said a white creature had attacked him, but the driver that came up upon the wreck said they didn't see anyone else. Later, at the hospital, the man had an episode when he believed he saw the creature again in the parking lot. The doctors at the hospital decided to send him to a mental ward after that. What was going on? First me digging into a failing law firm, and now this about a mentally sick man thinking he saw a creature in the woods. Was all of this connected? I had to know more about this, and went back to the redacted documents. There was one paragraph that talked about DuPont State Park. It said there was a facility up there, along with park rangers that were undercover to make sure no one found it. Strangely enough, there was something in the document about how the facility housed nuclear weapons, experiments, test subjects, among other things. I finally realized how big this was. I had unknowingly stumbled upon a bigger story than I bargained for. Without giving it a second thought, I drove to DuPont State Park, hoping to find answers. It wasn't a great idea to go hiking in a button-up shirt and dress shoes, I know, but you have to understand that I needed answers. I made my way down the gravel road that most hikers walk on. Other passerby gave me strange glances when I passed. Why would someone hide something up here? If there are so many people visiting this place. As I made my way up a hill, I spotted a fork in the road. The gravel road going to the left had a gate with a lock on it. As I made my way towards it, I looked around, seeing no one around me. I quickly climbed the gate and hurried down the road so no one could see me. The road I walked down was eerily dark, the trees blocking out the afternoon sun. Continuing on my way, the gravel turned into an actual paved road, enough for 2 vehicles. My day was getting weirder and weirder. As I ventured further and further down the road, I heard a hum of an electrical current to my right. I couldn't see any electrical poles or lines to trace back to where the electrical hum was. Could it be underground? I stood there trying to figure out where it came from. What I didn't notice was the sound of an ATV driving down the road. It was too late for me to hide when the side-by-side came upon me. The person driving stopped the vehicle a few feet from me. They stepped out and I got a better look at them. It was a tall man, dark hair and dark skin. He was dressed in park ranger attire. My eyes flicked down to his waist. A gun flashed at his hip. Why would a park ranger have a gun? Heart thumping, I tried not to act scared of him. I knew who he was really looking for. "You do know this is a restricted area, right?" He spoke, hands landing on his hips. I shook my head, licking my lip. "Sorry, I didn't see a sign saying that. I was looking for new places to hike." I looked him in the eye, his expression turning devilish. "You're hiking in slacks and a button-up shirt?" he asked. Knowing he caught me in a lie, I cursed at myself. "Yeah. I like to wind down after a day at work by hiking." Gave him a fake smile. The ranger raised an eyebrow and then jabbed his thumb at the side-by-side. "Get in." The ranger drove me all the way back to my car, the whole ride silent. I stepped off onto the ground, grabbing my keys and ready to drive away. As I went to my car, the ranger spoke up. "Take the other, more safe path. That way you don't get yourself killed." I turned, seeing his expressionless face as he drove away. What have I gotten myself into? It was late, I was tired, and I had to go home. The next city bus came to a stop. Something was off about it. It didn't have a route lit up, and it was mostly dark inside. Nevertheless, the doors opened. The bus was heading in the right direction, and given the late hour, I just wanted to go home and get some sleep, so I wasn't going to ask questions. I had just spent the night hanging out with friends. I had fun, but my social batteries were running out. I'm an introvert and have anxiety, and I had to get out before I completely drained myself. Given my aversion to driving, I took public transit. Taking the bus after midnight isn't most people's idea of a good time, but truthfully, I like the opportunity to see part of the city at night. The way the buildings are lit up, the silence of the bus, and just the ambience of being out in the dark is something I enjoy. Upon sitting down, I did what most bus travelers do. I pulled out my phone and started scrolling. I scrolled past the usual photos of friends' babies, puppies, Aunt Rhonda's MLM, and those weird political posts from your Uncle Fred. Suddenly my service cut out and I got the spinning loading wheel of death that everyone dreads. That's weird. I thought. The bus route was going through the heart of the city. There was no reason for the service to just go out like that. Now taken aback, I poked my head up and looked around. To this day, I wish I hadn't. I don't know if this experience could have been avoided, but maybe if I kept playing with my phone, it could have been better. Anything would have been better. I looked out the window and all I saw was an enveloping darkness that surrounded the whole bus. My goodness. I exclaimed mostly to myself. Must be a citywide power outage. This type of thing never really happens around here, and I didn't notice any bad weather. Yet, what other possible explanation did I have? With nothing else to do, I just went back to staring out the window. Yet it seemed more than just dark outside. It was the type of dark where you couldn't make out any shapes or figures. I couldn't even see houses, other people, or even other vehicles. It was a type of darkness I'd never experienced. Even with a major power outage, I should be able to see some light outside the bus windows. Yet there was nothing. I wanted to ask the bus driver if he or she knew what was going on, yet something stopped me. Something in my mind told me that I couldn't and shouldn't. That they don't want to be disturbed and I should just sit back down. Growing doubt and concern gnawed at me. Yet I didn't want to be a nuisance to the driver or appear like I'm doubting his ability. Of course the driver knows where they're going. I'm just being paranoid. I'm just being an idiot, really. Why would I think the driver isn't aware of what's going on? That's such a dumb thought. So that's what I did. I just sat there and watched the ever-passing darkness go past the bus windows. As I was settling back into my seat, the bus came to a stop. I thought this was a good thing, an indication that I'm overreacting and the bus was on a normal route, and I'm just being paranoid. Yet the bus just stopped. The doors didn't open. No one got on. Just sat there. This time I did decide to go talk to the driver, but when I went to get out of my seat I couldn't move. I was literally frozen in my seat. Now unsure of what was going on, I started panicking. I couldn't do anything. I couldn't even scream. My hands were shaking, but I couldn't go anywhere. Couldn't do anything. I had heard of fight, flight, or freeze, but I didn't know it was possible to freeze so literally. I didn't even know if I was frozen or somehow restrained by some entity from the darkness. I couldn't do anything. I felt absolutely hopeless. I don't know how long I sat like this, just glued to my seat. There was no indication of time passing. No acknowledgement from whatever was driving this bus of having stopped. And no explanations as to why I couldn't move. Then it was like something snapped. I could move. As quickly as the paralysis started, it was over. I started thrashing my hands and screaming, but either the driver didn't hear me or didn't care. At the same time, I regained my movement and so did the bus. I'm sure this is not a coincidence, yet I also have no idea how these events are tied. Yet the bus moving again was not an improvement. The bus started going faster and faster. It started gaining speed well past the speed limit, well past any speed that could considered be safe. Then the swerving started. Swerving in and out of traffic, if there was any traffic to be had. Going all over the road like one would see in a Los Angeles street chase. Whereas a few minutes ago I was held to my seat by an invisible force, I was now held to my seat out of fear of being thrown across the bus should I dare move. The bus felt like it was going 1,000,000 miles an hour. I was trying to think of what to do. What could be causing this? Yet the more I thought and worried, the faster the bus went. The bus just kept throttling and I couldn't take it anymore. I did all that was left to do. I started screaming. No, enough. I can't be on this anymore. I screamed. Please, enough. It was like the driver didn't know what was happening, or they didn't care. Both were equally terrifying. Please stop. Please, help me. I cried. I didn't know if anyone was around to hear me cry for help, but it's all that was left. No more. Help. Then the bus gradually slowed down. I was exhausted from the ride I'd been on and was still alone. The bus also didn't stop completely, just continued at its previous now leisurely pace in comparison to what I had just experienced. However, I was hardly relieved. This bus was driving me to my death as far as I knew. I curled up in my seat to a ball, sick and tired of this ride now. I started whimpering more to myself than anyone. I want off. Please help. I need help. A loud alarm was going off. Now what? I was freaking out now. What new fresh hell was this bus going to take me to now? I couldn't take it anymore. I couldn't take another surprise from this bus. I just wanted to go home and go to bed. Yet the alarm wasn't coming from the bus. It was coming from my pocket. My phone. My phone was ringing and I had service. I answered it without even looking at the number. Hello? I said. Who is this? I'm in desperate need of help. I said, probably sounding more and more frantic. Whoa, man, calm down. It's just me. Take a deep breath and tell me what's going on. It was my friend Jim, who I just saw at the get-together an hour ago. You seemed a bit off when you left the party tonight. I wanted to check on you. What's wrong? I was about to tell him about the creepy bus I stepped on thinking it was mine, and the hellish ride I'd been on. Yet as I looked up, for the first time the city was lit up like normal and the bus was pulling into the depot where I parked my car. I'm actually feeling a bit better now. Just, did anything weird happen in the city tonight? Like a major power outage or weird weather event? No, not as far as I know. I've been on Twitter the last 20 minutes and no one has said anything. Why, are you okay? I think so. I just saw something weird on the bus ride home is all. Listen, my bus just arrived and I have a 10-minute drive home now. I'll talk to you later. Wait, said Jim. You seemed off when you left and you were so frantic when you answered my call. Are you okay? Can I help? I think you already did. I replied. I'm feeling better now. I promise things are okay. Okay. Listen, I'll let you drive home now and I'll call you in the morning. Good night. I hung up my call with Jim completely unsure of what I just experienced. I'm not sure how Jim's call came through. I'm not even sure what just happened. I got off the bus and when I passed the driver, they looked like an ordinary person. When I turned around and looked at the bus, it still didn't have much lit up, but otherwise just looked like a bus. I drove home perplexed and rattled and unsure of what happened. I, to this day, don't know how Jim got through, or why the bus became normal after his call. I'm just eternally grateful to have a friend called to check on me, and that his call got through. I discovered at the young age of 9 years old that I could see things that others couldn't. Well, one thing specifically. The man on the roof. Even now, 18 years after I saw it, I still don't have the faintest idea what this creature is. I know that it chooses its victims randomly, and probably kills more people than most other causes of death. I know that I am the only one with knowledge of its existence, and unfortunately I don't know how to stop the damn thing. I need to tell you all the story of this creature in the hope that it can someday be killed. The first time I saw the man on the roof was when I was 9. I was supposed to be changing into my pajamas and getting ready for bed, but I had instead become struck with the curious fascination that only a child has. The window on my second-floor bedroom overlooked the street and provided a clear view of the other houses. And it was from here that I saw him. My child's brain immediately called him the man on the roof. And the name has stuck ever since then. He was a jet-black silhouette laying parallel on the angled roof of my neighbor's house. I could only see him because he was clearly framed from the light of a street light. I remember trying to figure out why anyone would want to lay on the roof of the Morris house, and how they could even do it. The roof was angled steeply enough that it would be difficult to stand, and laying would be impossible. Yet here he was, a shadow of an incredibly tall and thin man clinging to the shingles of the roof at an impossible angle. My dad entered the room and I immediately dragged him over to the window to show him the man on the roof. He obliged, knowing it would be the only way to get me to go to bed. I pointed directly across the street to where the man was laying on the roof of Mr. and Mrs. Morris's house, expecting him to be just as curious as I was. Instead, his reaction was confusion. After looking out the window for several seconds, not seeing what I was seeing, he turned and began shepherding me to bed. Dad was tired, and no explanation was going to get him to look at the man on the roof, or would get him to budge. After he tucked me in and turned out the light, I found myself back at the window watching the man on the roof, my initial curiosity now fading into a sense of dread. In the morning, he was gone, as if the light of the rising sun had dispelled his eerily silhouetted figure. I tried in vain to tell my parents about the man on the roof, and they assumed it was just another monster under the bed haunting the overactive imagination of a 9-year-old girl. The night, he was back, laying in the same position as the previous night. My childlike curiosity of a new discovery had now turned completely into fear and revulsion. I wanted the man on the roof gone, so a routine was established that would last for the next few nights. I would glance a fearful look out the window across the street, climb into bed and request my dad look for the man on the roof. He would oblige and walk to the window. I could tell he wasn't actually looking for anything. I couldn't see the man, but he would close the blinds and assure me that nothing was there and that I was safe. I didn't feel safe. Those were sleepless nights, knowing that the man on the roof was out here lurking, and I was the only one who could see him. Almost a week later, at the start of the weekend, I was awoken from restless sleep full of dreams of inhuman shadows climbing the walls of my house. Police lights were flashing through into my room, and there was a commotion going on across the street. I didn't need to look to know that the police were at the house. I found out in the morning that Mr. Morris had come home from work late and found his wife dead. I heard the words natural causes, or heart failure, and elderly floated around, but they meant nothing to me. I knew the man on the roof had killed Mrs. Morris, but no one believed me. My parents figured that was how a young mind works to understand a complicated thing like death. That night, the man on the roof was gone. In the years that followed, I forgot about the man on the roof. He went from being a night terror of a young child to a forgotten relic of a childhood now outgrown. Unfortunately, I wouldn't be able to escape another sighting of him forever. 7 years had already been a stretch considering how often he hunts. I was sitting in the living room with the TV on in the background, idly reading something while a news anchor droned on, when I happened to glance up at the screen. Yes, Rob, crews here assure me that they are well equipped to deal with any outages from the storm, and that the damage... I tuned out the words and must have turned pale enough to warrant a comment from my mom, but I didn't hear her. The familiar sense of dread and revulsion had returned and brought with it the memories of the creature that had terrified me as a kid. Just behind the news reporter, a few storm-battered homes down, the man on the roof was laying on the sloped roof of a house, his unmistakable, elongated silhouette barely visible in the gloom of the late evening's shadows. Before the newscast ended, I managed to tear my eyes away from the man on the roof down to the bottom of the screen. The words, "Outages after severe storm, Tampa, Florida," appeared in front of my eyes. I knew where to look even though I didn't want to. In the next few days, I began to pore through the local news and police reports of Tampa and found what I had been looking for. It was difficult to know exactly what I was looking for, as a surprising number of people die from natural causes, but I found it. I was hoping that maybe my eyes had deceived me in the unsteady light of the newscast, but the small little article I was staring at squashed that little scrap of hope. It said that someone had called police to a house after smelling what seemed to be burning rubber emanating from the place, and police had found the sole occupant dead. What was odd, however, was that the cause of death stated the 29-year-old man had passed away due to a heart attack. A heart attack at 29. Definitely unusual. Unusual enough that I knew I was looking at the handiwork of the man on the roof. All the memories of seeing the man on the roof as a child had begun to return to me, and I was sure that he was real. Not even a year later, I would be able to confirm my suspicions firsthand. I was exercising my newfound freedom of car ownership whenever possible, and had decided to spend the night at a friend's house. I was getting on in the evening when I finally made my way down the street towards my destination, and I noticed a patch of shadow darker than the others. Hesitating for a second, I slowed my car at the house 2 doors down from my friend's place and glanced up. The man on the roof was here again. I could see his unnatural form clinging to the angled slope of the roof, and a wave of dread washed over me. I reached my friend's house and she greeted me as I got out of the car. She had seen me slow at the house where the silhouette shape now lay, and asked why I looked so shaken. I brushed it off with a half-assed reason about someone staring at me from inside the house and inquired about the resident. I already had an inkling of what she'd tell me, but I wanted to confirm it. Old lady who lives there. Her husband passed away a few years ago, and she kind of keeps to herself now. I go over there occasionally to play cribbage with her, she responded, confirming my fears of a lone occupant in the house. I'd begun to surmise that was how it hunted. It would choose someone, then wait for them to be alone and unsuspecting in the night. That was how it had gotten my neighbor Mrs. Morris years ago, and how it had no doubt killed countless others. I knew my friend couldn't see the man on the roof, so I didn't waste my time when I knew the outcome would be looking like a lunatic. The night passed, and in the morning, my curiosity overwhelmed me. I knew that in the sunlight of the morning, the man on the roof would be gone. I needed to know if anything had happened in that house overnight. After a moderate amount of persuasion, I convinced my friend to head over to her elderly neighbor's home to check on her. As we approached the house, an awful sense of foreboding washed over me, and I glanced up at where the man on the roof had been. We reached the front door, and after both knocking and ringing, the doorbell failed. My friend retrieved an expertly hidden key from under the welcome mat. Upon opening the door, we were both sent reeling by an overwhelming, powerful scent of burning rubber. The stench was awful, and I found myself wondering how we couldn't smell it when we were outside. We had entered into a dimly lit living room, and as we struggled with the overpowering smell, I spotted something on the tall ceiling of the room. 2 handprints had been burned and charcoaled into the ceiling. Just from the sight of them, my heart dropped into my stomach. They were the most unnatural things I had ever seen. The palms were too small for the overall size of the print, and the fingers were long and thin. From the base of the palm to the start of the 5 slender fingers was maybe 3 inches, but the fingers were all well over 7 inches. Strange curves and disjointed turns of the fingers probably added more length to the inhuman parts. Forcing myself to walk forward into the kitchen, struggling to move through the sudden molasses that had appeared in my joints, I was greeted with the sight that I knew would be there. The elderly neighbor, I don't even know her name, was laying on the kitchen table pale as a sheet. On the ceiling above her, 2 footprints were branded in the same charcoal-like burn as the handprints in the living room. All I could see before I backed out of the room were strange, elongated, and separated toes attached to a small, inhuman-looking footprint. We appeared back outside, and I can't remember actually leaving. But we both made it outside in shock and called the police. After an hour or two of waiting outside, an EMT informed us that the cause of death was a severe stroke. I tried asking about the hand and footprints on the ceiling, but no one there could provide an explanation. After this first-hand encounter with the man on the roof, I needed answers. Despite my search lasting over a year, it yielded nothing. I didn't have much to go on and couldn't find anything online. I remembered that Mr. Morris, the husband of my neighbor who had been killed by the man on the roof, had sold the house years ago. I reached out to the realtor who was in charge of the sale at the time and inquired about anything unusual in the house. The realtor told me that there had been strange handprints on the ceiling of the basement and footprints on the ceiling of the ground floor. I had expected as much and wasn't surprised. But the last thing the realtor told me was chilling. The only time I met Mr. Morris during the sale was actually when he was leaving the house for the last time. He was muttering, "I won't let the hand steps catch me." I only remember it because of how unusual the wording was. Figured he probably meant footsteps. I chalked it up to a guy in mourning. But it was so strange. My search for answers concluded with another encounter with the man on the roof. I'd been driving home after getting off work late. My asshole boss had made me close even though I had exams to be studying for. I was more focused on the unappealing prospect of a late night of cramming and almost missed him. I saw him out of the corner of my eye and didn't realize I had slammed on the brakes until my car jerked to a painful stop in the middle of the street. I looked up at the house and made a split-second decision. The kind of decision where you know the longer you think on it, the likelier it is you'll make the wrong choice. I decided I wasn't going to let the man on the roof claim whoever was in that house as his next victim. I did my best to swallow my unease, and got out of the car before I could second-guess myself. I had no idea how I was going to get this clueless occupant out of the house and to safety, but I was sure I could improvise something. I began to walk up the short path to the house. The brisk fall air was already cold at night, but it felt strangely colder here. I tried keeping my eyes off the man on the roof and forced myself to focus on the front door. The fear I had felt while walking up to the elderly woman's house was nothing compared to this. I had done that in the daylight, and when I had glanced up to the roof, there was nothing there. Now, however, he was there. I got close to the porch and began to imagine that the man on the roof was staring at me. I could feel his gaze from my freezing ears all the way to my trembling legs. Before I could reach the porch, I stopped. When you're that afraid, the only way through is just to keep moving, but I had stopped. I mentally cursed myself and willed my legs to keep moving the few steps needed to reach the porch, but they wouldn't budge. I found myself looking back up at the man on the roof again. This was the closest I had ever been to him. I was close enough to understand now why he had always looked like a silhouette in the distance. He was a silhouette. There was no differentiation between any part of his elongated form. I could see his hands now, too. I knew them all too well. The image of their prints burned into my memory, just as they had somehow been burned into the ceilings of his prey. Those disgusting, malformed hands were currently digging into the side of the roof and holding him perfectly parallel to the roof's angle. As I stared in sickened fascination at the man on the roof, he began to turn his head to return the favor. I could tell that the dark shape that was his head was buried into the house. The instant I realized his head was turning, I also realized it was moving the wrong way. He could have turned to look directly at me, and wouldn't need to move his head far at all, but instead he was twisting it the wrong way. I could hear what sounded like bones and tendons cracking and ripping, as his head slowly turned like an owl. And before he could see me, I ran. I bolted as fast as I could back to my car, still stopped in the middle of the street, and drove as fast as I could away from the man on the roof. still regret that decision. Maybe I could have saved whoever was inside. In the end, I don't think it would have mattered. I think once the man on the roof chooses you as its new victim, it won't ever leave. No matter how hard you try, there will always be those moments when you're alone and the shadows outside are lengthening. As for what happened to whoever was inside that house, I don't know. After that night, I stopped trying to find answers. The feeling of pure terror and revulsion that had rooted me to the ground while I listened to the horrible noises of that creature's head turned towards me had dispersed any ideas I had of searching for answers. For several years, I was successful in blocking out the man on the roof's existence. I had only seen him twice. Once he was below me while I was on the freeway. He had found his way onto the flat roof of what I figured was a small motel, and I imagined him feeling quite chuffed that he didn't need to use those monstrous hands to cling to any steep roof. The other time, I only saw him in passing as I drove down a side street. I registered he was there and quickly accelerated away, wanting nothing to do with it anymore. That takes us to the present day. Well, over a day ago now, I guess. I'm sure you know where I'm going with this. I guess I could only escape it for so long. I was driving home from work. Now a much better job than the one I had worked long ago. Not that I'll ever get to go back. I had made the turn onto my street and almost immediately I could feel that something was wrong. Spotted a shape on a roof and immediately began counting and recounting the houses as I drew nearer. The pit in my stomach that my heart had wormed its way to grow even deeper. The man on the roof was on my roof, and he wasn't lying down. He was standing. I looked up at him. A common occurrence in my nightmares now made a reality once again. The first thought that went through my brain wasn't anything about how he reached nearly 8 feet tall, or how his eyes glowed with a dim white light. Instead, I was thinking back to how happy I had been when I could finally afford to live on my own. Not that it would have mattered if I lived with anyone. The man on the roof would have just waited me out. That's what I've learned since then. That's what the man on the roof has taught me. In the end, we're all alone. Of course, I don't go inside my house. I decided to just drive around for the night and try to figure out what to do. Would he only stay in my house? Could he reach me if I slept in my car a long way away? What about a tent? Or an apartment building? As questions and their unknown answers raced through my head, I realized that the sun was rising. I decided on the safest course of action I could think of. I turned back to my home and approached it. Still just as uneasy about the place as the night before. There was nothing wrong on the inside. No burned prints. No strange 8-foot-tall monstrosity lurking in my closet. As I began to gather a few essentials into a bag, I realized the true horror of the man on the roof. It was possibly the only predator that could make its prey feel the most vulnerable where it normally felt the safest. Its home. After having gathered what I needed, I called in a favor from a friend. She allowed me to stay at her place for a few nights, and that was all I needed. I only got here with a few hours to spare before dark, but I had a decently comfortable room in a house with another person. If I was right, I would be safe here until I could figure out more permanent accommodations. A few hours ago, as the shadows around the house began to lengthen and the sun began to set, I had prepared to get some sleep despite the feeling of creeping dread that now set in. I figured I'd just have to get used to the feeling of living on borrowed time now. I had fallen asleep quickly, as I hadn't slept in over 24 hours. I awoke with a distinct feeling that something was wrong. I checked my phone and found that the time was now 10:20. There was also a text from over an hour ago. It was from my friend. A friend whose house I was staying in. Forgot to tell you, I'm going out tonight, but I'll be back probably after midnight. I sat there in shock as I realized two things simultaneously. I was alone in this house. I could smell burning rubber. My mouth went dry as I ran through my options. Didn't seem like I had any. In the time since I had woken up, the stench of burning rubber had gotten worse. I decided that I at least wasn't going to be another murder written in the thousands of natural causes statistics. Pulled out my laptop and began pouring everything I could remember about the man on the roof onto paper. If I die, people are at least going to know how I went out. Whether they want to believe it or not is up to them. I figured a community like all of you is more open to this kind of shit, so here I am. I was thinking maybe I'd make a run for it, but I don't think it'll matter. The nauseous stench is overpowering and I can hear excited footsteps on the roof now. But they don't sound like footsteps. They sound more like hands. Okay, to preface, it's a well-known family secret that my maternal grandfather, Gramps, served in the Waffen SS during the Second World War. He was wounded in action and still has his wound badge in silver for his lost two fingers. In the 50s, after the war, he moved to America. He worked in Pontiac at a General Motors engine plant for 40 years. When he retired in 2001, he was a true American. He owned a nice house in the suburbs that he gave to my mother as a wedding gift. He owns a big property up north where he hunts and fishes, and he drives a beautiful old '66 Corvette. He passed away last week from acute lung cancer at the ripe old age of 97. Never smoked a day in his life, but they say a lot of veterans breathe in a lot of bad stuff during their service. So, I guess it wasn't too surprising. I was always pretty close to Gramps, so I got a little bit of a surprise in his will. He left his daughter, and only child, almost everything he owned. However, his oldest grandson, me, got the key to a safety deposit box that no one knew anything about. An old man with a limp who I had never met before introduced himself at the funeral after the service and will reading. Our conversation went something like this. "You must be Lewis's grandson David, am I correct?" "Well, yes. Who might you be?" "My name's Jonas. I knew your grandfather for quite a long time," he said with a smile. He looked to be maybe 60, and he had a thick European accent. I couldn't place it, but it might have been German. "Well, it's nice to meet you, Jonas. What was it that you wanted to speak to me about?" His entire demeanor changed. From one of kindness to simple, cold determination. "I'll be blunt. I know what you were going to find in that safety deposit box, and I don't think you want to be wrapped up in it." He reached into a pocket and withdrew a thick envelope. "I believe this is more than fair compensation. $5,000. All I want is that key." What had seemed like a genuine concern from the older man at first had rapidly turned into something sinister. His offer had seemed more than a little forceful, and despite his strangely small stature, I found myself more than a little intimidated. I'm sorry, but my grandfather wanted me to have whatever's in that box. $5,000 just isn't worth disrespecting my grandfather's final wishes." His expression darkened considerably then. "I'm afraid you're making a mistake, son. A grave mistake." And with that, he had turned and left the building. The whole event had seemed almost like a movie scene more than real life. I knew my next step was to investigate the safety deposit box. Maybe Jonas had been a friend's son from back in Germany. Or maybe he had just been some guy trying to get my grandfather's gold or something. I don't know the whole story at the time anyways. The bank let me in with no issues, and when I entered the vault, I discovered that the key opened a tiny little box numbered S32. As I opened the box, a hiss escaped from the apparently sealed container. The rush of air smelled like old paper and a hint of rust. Inside the box was an original copy of Mein Kampf. I'm not sure what I expected, but it certainly wasn't this. As I lifted the book out, I found it to be in excellent condition, no worse than a paperback at the public library. I flipped the cover open and found a small note written in what I assumed to be German on the back of a little photograph. It was extremely faded, but it depicted a man in a black uniform leaning up against what looked like a small artillery cannon. Maybe Gramps, but it's hard to tell. I stood, scrutinizing the photo for long enough that the security guard at the door eventually asked if I was alright. That snapped me back into reality. I turned to leave, and I was walking past the guard and out the door. I heard a little chatter. I turned around to see the guard picking up a safety deposit box key. I checked my pocket and found my key still there. The guard offered me the key. "This fell out of your book," he said flatly. I took the key and read the tag S33. On a whim, I walked back to the wall of small deposit boxes and opened up S33. Another rush of air, another faint scent of old paper and metal. Inside this box, however, I found a small leather-wrapped journal and a little cardboard sleeve with what looked at first glance to be a booklet inside. As I inspected the journal, I felt a hand grab my shoulder firmly, and I spun around. "Sir, your 15 minutes are up. It's the next guest's turn in the vault. You can take anything or leave anything that will fit in the boxes, but we need you to move along now." After briefly catching my breath, I tucked the books into my satchel bag and locked the 2 boxes, then walked out after the guard. I did my best to translate the little note when I got home. It turns out it wasn't written in German at all, but rather Finnish. The note read, "Louis SS Panzerjäger, Battalion 6 Nord in..." Town name was illegible. "Winter 1942. I flipped through the entirety of the Mein Kampf copy, and there was lots of writing in the margins. I'll probably translate that for you all later if anything proves interesting. In the back, I did find a small slip of paper. It had some sort of rune shape on it. It looked like 3 lines crossing each other like a snowflake. I wasn't sure what it meant, but it somehow felt sinister, though that might have just been the terrible book I was holding. The small cardboard sheath held a tiny booklet. On the front, the little booklet said, "Sold Butch," with a pair of SS runes above the word. Inside was a picture of my grandfather, along with identification information like his name and blood type. The last book, the leather-bound journal, was what drew my attention enough to translate first. I couldn't read the German, but after translating, it seemed to start out innocuous enough. The book started out with leaving home. Apparently he wasn't tall enough to serve in the army, so he joined the SS instead. His unit was sent with the army to invade Norway, and he almost killed a British soldier there. According to the journal, his shot missed only because he was shivering from the cold, but I would like to think that maybe he didn't want to really kill anyone. After Norway, his unit was sent up to Finland, where his unit of Panzerjägers, or tank hunters, were tasked with stopping Soviet tank attacks across a river. That summer, 1941, was supposedly a beautiful time to be in Norway. Above the Arctic Circle, it never truly got warm, but the forests and fjords were described as beautiful. Operation Barbarossa, the German invasion of Russia, was more or less just a slow walk for him. The anti-tank guns were slow to move, and he didn't see much fighting at all. When the fall rains came, the guns couldn't be moved thanks to the mud, and so his unit was put up in a defensive line in the forest around the Russian town of Zabily Arny. Daily life in his unit consisted of lots of sitting around in the growing cold, cleaning and recleaning the anti-tank guns, and patrolling the forest around the river they were stationed by. When it gets interesting is November of 1941. Now, I can't read the German to translate it myself, but I'll try to make the Google Translate as readable as possible while keeping it as faithful to the original as I can. November 3rd, 1941. Freezing today. The wind was broken by the trees, but we can hear it overhead. Our sentries brought in a group of Finns, escorted by some Finnish ski troops. They were just normal people. They said they lived in a village that was destroyed deep in the forest. The people described a fierce attack in the night by the Soviets. What the ski troops described sounded like an artillery strike, but we have no records of such a strike. It trickled down, though, through the ranks that there might be some Soviet self-propelled guns in the area, so they decided to send us, the Panzerjäger, to investigate. Lieutenant Zimmerman decided to send our 4 gun crews, numbers 4 through 7, plus the Finnish ski troops to act as translators and maybe do some scouting for us. There's not much of a dawn anymore, as the sun doesn't rise as much as the sky just somewhat lightens, but we leave in the morning. November 4th, 1941. Bitterly cold again today. Moving barely keeps you warm. Exposed skin turns red, then white in only minutes, then loses feeling. The horses are bundled as tightly as we are, but I fear they don't have long. Something about the forest just spooks the horses. The Finnish troops say there are wolves around. They spotted tracks and found a carcass of a caribou. I've known horses my whole life, and the wolves of Silesia never scared horses so badly. Because I've always liked studying language, I spent some time with the Finns to try to learn. As we sat around a fire talking, I noticed one of the smaller men looked particularly young. I asked the Finns' commander, only to find that the man in question was in fact a boy of 13. His entire family had been murdered during the Winter War of 1939 through 1940. He had been hunting in this very forest at the time. The unit commander had only accepted the boy after he had stalked the ski troop over 100 kilometers through the treacherous forest and heard the boy's story. He wouldn't allow the boy to see combat. After all, he was just a child, but the boy was allowed to follow along and hunt with the men. I tried to speak to the boy before I left, but he wouldn't even acknowledge that I was there. Strange folk, the Finns. November 7th, 1941. It was bitterly cold again this morning. The sentries seem to have shirked their duty as they are nowhere to be seen. We camped in 2 places to avoid an artillery strike destroying all 4 guns, but there was no smoke coming from the other camp, which is strange. After investigating, we found the other camp a bloody mess. Men hacked apart in their tents, with various parts simply missing without a trace. The tents themselves were slashed and burned. We never heard so much as a shout, let alone a gunshot. The guns, number 4 and 5, were untouched, but their horses were in the same shape as the men. Lieutenant Zimmerman was found, or more correctly, what was left of the lieutenant. Most of his legs were gone, as though they had been torn off by something with teeth. Perhaps the strangest part, though, was that in one hand he held his bayonet, and in the other, a scrap of fabric. Not Soviet uniform, but rather the rough-spun fabric of the Finnish ski troops' cloaks. A quick inspection found that none of our 7 Finns were missing part of their cloak, so they were cleared, but resentment was quick to form. I may be the only one to notice, but the boy of 13 was nowhere to be found. It's worth noting that a few pages were torn out of here, and unfortunately it looks like those entries are lost forever. November 10th, 1941. At least Command was right. We found the Soviet self-propelled guns, but they were just like our own camp. The men were hacked apart and their tents burned. Their vehicles were in perfect working order though. Just some snow on top of them. The whole site looked like to be maybe 3 days old. Plausible enough that it might have been attacked around the same time as our camp was. Though it must have been a different group of Finns. If indeed it was Finns that did this. We got 2 of the 4 things running. They all have dozens of gallons of petrol on board, so we think we can drive them around 100 kilometers assuming no breakdowns. It'll be nice to not have to walk for a while. The second lieutenant decided to put me in charge of one of the Soviet tractors. We hitched up our gun, number 6, and I got my crew on board. We can only fit 3 inside the warm casemate. A driver, a gun loader, and a commander. So 3 will have to ride on the outside, at least for now. The Finns flatly refused to ride and decided to ski alongside. The boy still hasn't returned and I'm starting to worry about it. The Finnish commander simply won't acknowledge that the boy was ever there. Though some of the other troopers give me sideways glances when I ask. The entire situation seems very strange. More so even than the brutal attacks. November 11th, 1941. The boy returned this morning. He was just there, sitting around the Finnish campfire. No one else seemed to notice that there was anything strange about his appearance, nor did they notice the tear in his cloak. We found the village today, another group of mutilated Soviets. This group was small, and their gear was ragged. Maybe they were survivors of the other group. Maybe they were deserters. I really don't know. What I noticed though was that one of them had a knife in their cold, dead hand. They also had another scrap of cloak fabric. I hid this from the others. I don't really know why. Maybe I just wanted to keep my own fear from spreading. Or maybe I knew deep down that there was nothing we could do about it. I caught the boy looking at me from time to time. November 12th, 1941. The other house burned down in the night. The remains of the men are just bones and ash. Even still, we could see the spots where the bones were scarred as though by axes or another blade. They must have been ripped apart in their sleep. With the second lieutenant dead, I'm in charge now. We need to get the hell out of these woods. November 13th, 1941. The paranoia is getting to everyone. And Schmidt broke. He just started waving his rifle at anyone who came near. He refused to get back on board the tractor, and when he started shooting at us, we had no choice. He took 4 bullets before he died. I can only pray that my shot was not the one that stopped his heart. We had to press on. It's getting even colder at night. The sun doesn't rise, of course, but even the faint light we see that tells us it is day is gradually getting dimmer. Schmidt was the most veteran among us. He always said that winter in the mountains is the worst thing in the world. I guess he didn't want to spend a winter in this hell. It's darker again, too. The fire barely seems to illuminate beyond itself. Where once the fire threw warmth and light in a 5-meter ring, it now barely illuminates the man just opposite to you. There were 28 Panzerjäger and 7 Finns plus the boy. Now there are only 6 Panzerjäger and 3 Finns. The boy is gone again. November 14th, 1941. Only one of the Finns returned today. The 3 went to scout ahead of the vehicle, but only one came back. He was mauled badly. His right arm was gone, and he had a deep cut in his abdomen. As the only one who could speak any Finnish, I tried to translate, but it was almost unintelligible. Our medic wasn't able to save him. In his fit of pain and suffering, all he said was, "Please, please, Jonas, no." We are being watched now. I am sure of it. Why he didn't stop us at the outset of this cursed journey, I might never understand. All I can hope is that he believes the rest of the division will be too much for him to defeat. We will be making our way west as far as possible. I don't think we can outrun him. More pages are torn out here. November 17th, 1941. The banging doesn't end. I don't think he understands the vehicle is armored, but he won't stop banging. We've had to drive so slowly due to the close trees that we are barely making walking speed. All of the hatches are shut, and the tractor reeks of 3 days of shit. But if we open anything to clear the air, he might get in. The banging won't stop. It just won't. Always the banging. November 19th, 1941. We're out of fuel. There is no hope now. The vision slits see nothing but trees all around. We can't get the extra fuel off the back of the tractor, and we can't move the vehicle without fuel. I think we might have to fight it. November 20th, 1941. It got them. My hand is still bleeding as I write, but the nurse might take my journal from me, so I must write it now. We tried to fight. I don't know what other choice we had. We had rifles, but the boy had claws and teeth. We riddled it with bullets, bayonets, and I even managed to lob a grenade at it. And I think I managed to hurt its leg because it limped into the woods and didn't follow me right away. I paid for that with 2 fingers off my hand. No one else escaped. I can still feel its eyes watching me. The one who made it away. And the banging. I can still hear it. I still hear the banging. I jumped and sheepishly grinned. Something was knocking on the door. Unnerving as it is, my grandfather must have written this silly thing to pass the time. There's simply no way a little peasant boy from Finland could have killed 30 men, much less have traced my lineage to find me. What an absurd notion. Anyway, this is barely a quarter of the way through my grandfather's journal. Just skimming through, there's plenty of other noteworthy things. I'll update this after I figure out who's knocking on my door, like a maniac. The prison I work in holds no prisoners. It's pretty weird, yeah. The only time I get to see them is when they arrive. The guards have to stand in a line facing the new inmates as they head into the prison, never to be seen again. I don't know what's weirder, the fact that our prison doesn't even have a name, or that we never see the inmates at all. Not to mention some of their sentences are pretty harsh considering what they're being convicted for. All the prisoners are on death row, however. We're not in charge of giving the executions. That's the job of the warden himself to deal with. When you hear death row, you usually think the worst of the worst. The people who you wouldn't mind they commit suicide one morning. But these prisoners' bad deeds ranged from gambling, intoxication, over-smoking, and sometimes, for some fucking reason, sex. That's right. Some prisoners are put on death row here for having sex. Every part of the prison is completely divided via airlock doors that need administration's approval for entry and exit. So if you want to make it to the cell blocks, you need to radio in with them. And yes, there are airlocks for the men's and women's bathroom each. All prison personnel are not allowed to be in the same parts as the prisoners. So, if they're in the cafeteria, we can't be in there. Or in the kitchen either. If you fail to finish your duties, let's say cleaning, in time, you're getting a reduced pay for that week. And if you ever wind up in the same areas as the inmates, you're considered dead, and a letter is sent home to your loved ones. It's really backwards if you think about it. The inmates who are on death row practically have ample opportunity to escape at literally any point they want to. I mean, it's not like the guards can do anything about it because we literally can't. But our job isn't to think about that. Our job is to make sure nobody gets in or out. I don't know, and personally, I don't want to know. I've seen the stories on the subreddit, how people's curiosities and attitudes lead them towards a life of torment and pain. I've seen and heard all the warning signs to know that not some, but a lot of things in life are much better left unknown rather than anything else. So I never questioned it. Never gave it one thought on my mind in my 15 years of serving this prison. And never, ever, did the unanswered question ever consume me to the point where I just had to know. Unfortunately, I couldn't say the same things for one of my work friends. His name was Sebastian. He was in his mid-20s, was a fucking idiot, and therefore was always curious. He told me his dream job was to work for NASA or SpaceX or any company studying space. He always loved learning and loved talking about education. That and the weird-ass prison we work in. I think it was about 2 years of working here that he completely broke and decided to do some investigating on his own. Reception, administration, the warden, not even some guards were willing to say anything to him. And eventually all of his pent-up curiosity was finally answered to him with his death. It was 11 p.m., the time when all the prisoners were asleep. I was on the night shift, making sure everybody besides some guards and janitors were off the site. Sebastian wasn't supposed to be on site today, so I was pretty surprised to see him there. He was very distinguishable from the other guards. Well, with his baby blue eyes and his almost perfectly white hair, not to mention his under-average height. I asked him, "What the fuck are you doing here?" Sebastian stammered, just doing some overtime." I knew it was bullshit, and he did too. We didn't do overtime at this nameless prison. He knew that I knew it was bullshit, so I told him, "Follow me outside. Come on." And he complied. We walked together from the indoor courtyard to the indoor gym, to the indoor administration, where he was given a stern talking to by the head of security, and eventually to the outdoor area, where that son of a gun tased me till I blacked out cold. I was awoken by the head of security, where he told me that he climbed into the vents, what with his small stature and all. My job was to track him as he was moving fast, and I was the only one who knew him really well. Administration gave me permission to check every single part of the prison. I only asked to check the cell blocks. They told me it was suicide because that was where all the prisoners were being held. I told them that Sebastian would be there, or I would quit tomorrow morning. They let me through. I ran as fast as I could, from the indoor administration to the indoor gym, through the indoor courtyard to where I was stopped by an airlock. I radioed in with the reception. What the fuck? I thought I just said to let me through the cell blocks. The only reply I got was static. I told them otherwise. Said a deep voice behind my back. I turned around and saw a man, wearing a two-piece business suit and pure Damascus 14K gold sunglasses. He had no face, no ears, no nose, and his skin was pure gray. He was the warden. I need to be let in here. He's going to be considered dead, but I can still save him. He ignored my statement, walked over to me and said, "Do you ever wonder what we keep in here? What kind of sick and twisted things are stored in this prison with no name? What kind of people come in here with deeds so vile? You just want to kill them yourselves." Just as he finished talking, I heard yelling from the other side of the airlock, "Help me! Open the airlock now!" I looked through a window on the airlock to see a faint silhouette of a man. The warden continued on, "Well, we don't house inmates in this prison." As the screaming man came running at full speed towards the airlock door, I saw a horrific sight. We house wolves. The screaming man was Sebastian. Half of his face was mauled off. You could see his skull. His left eye was missing, and his other eye was crying blood. He was begging to open the door, all while me and the warden stood there, watching him. One man stood in defeat. The other showed no emotion. Not with his stance, not with his head, not with anything. These wolves, the warden continued, are the addictions of man. Smoking, gambling, killing, yes, even sex. They're all here as the beings they really are, wolves slowly chowing down on their prey. Suddenly a pair of 8 footsteps came ever closer, and Sebastian slowly stopped yelling and started to just cry, as he realized that his only hope had abandoned him, symbolized through the warden walking away from the airlock. The last thing he said to me was, "When you're done here, you're fired." I ignored him and watched as Sebastian stopped crying and began screaming, not for help, not for me or for the warden, but in agony and pain. He was eaten alive from the bottom up by the wolves of curiosity. I have been technical diving for the better part of a decade. Something about the ocean and all its unexplored wonder has always drawn me to the deep. An entire, uncharted, alien world lurks just beneath us, just waiting to reveal its mysteries to those daring enough to take the plunge. I guess you could say that diving is my passion. It has been my entire adult life. Now I can't even bring myself to go near the deep end of the pool without having a panic attack. It all started when one of my best buddies approached me with the idea to go on a little excursion. Todd had a fairly formidable boat that he carved out a living with by engaging in, let's just say, less than legal activities. Anyway, some reputable character that Todd helps move cargo into the country had told him about a cave several miles off the coast of his own country. Truth be told, no matter how much time I spend on the background of how we found ourselves 100 feet below sea level, I'll still never understand why or how I agreed to such a misguided idea. Hardly matters now. At 99 feet below sea level, the pressure on your body normally felt by the atmosphere is quadrupled. The sunlight feebly attempts in vain to penetrate the blackness. Darkness rules there, and creatures of the dark are all that inhabit it. I checked my depth and air pressure gauges and looked up to see Todd, hand signaling me to follow him to the mouth of the cave. I flutter-kicked silently forward, floating just above the seaweed and silt-covered ocean floor, taking in as much of the world as my low-profile, narrow-lens mask would let me. When we reached the mouth of the cave, Todd dropped to the floor and clipped his line to a formation near the entrance. This is a very important step in cave diving. That line was our only way back out of the system. I held my light on his hands while he worked, but my gaze drifted back to the mouth of the cave. The darkness was just as oppressive as always, but there was something strange. I couldn't put my finger on it at the time. The ominous black maw was somehow more intense than it should be. Then I heard it. A low-pitched roar from out of the deep. A thunderous echo sounded from so far below, it was a whisper by the time it reached us. That's the strange thing about your hearing when you dive that far down. You don't just hear, you feel. You feel it in your chest, in your bones. The noise echoed through me and I felt my stomach drop. We hadn't come this far for nothing though, and we dutifully pressed on. Todd held the line and made entrance first, and I followed behind. My hand trailed along the line as it unfurled. With graceful strokes, we kicked only about 30 to 40 feet into the system before my light caught a silver glint out of the backdrop of darkness and neutral-toned rock formations. Todd signaled that he saw it as well, and we stopped. Kicking myself over to it, the narrow beam cast itself on the object. The eerie silence was broken only by the soft rhythmic beat of our exhales as they bubbled up to the roof of the tunnel. The glint revealed itself to be a scuba tank half buried in the silt. Many cave divers bring along spare safety rigs. Last thing you want when you're 100 feet down enclosed by a rock ceiling is to run out of air. But who would leave this behind? We clipped it off of our line, with the intention of taking it back with us when we made the return trip. Delving deeper into the system, we came across our first fork. Todd signaled to me. He was asking which way I thought we should go. My light panned back and forth between the two tunnels. It was smothered by the abysmal nothingness no more than 10 feet ahead. The ever-present pressure continued to squeeze me like a python coiling around its prey. It was oppressive. I felt a slight current brush the cold, dark water across my skin. It came from the left tunnel. I gestured to the left and we continued our exploration. We were 110 feet deep here. Even as an experienced diver, the pressure became taxing. Several kick paces in, something caught the focus beam of my light. It was unnatural. It stuck out like a sore thumb among the rocky stalagmites within my narrow beam of vision. I gracefully kicked over to it, careful not to stir the slit at the bottom of the cave floor. Once stirred, silt takes a considerable amount of time before settling again. More time than the air tanks afforded us. If I thought my vision was limited before, the silt storm would mean complete and total blindness. Reaching my point of fixation, I settled and focused upon the thing that had caught my eye. Pulling it from its sunken place in the sand, I found it to be a diver's slate. Divers can't communicate verbally underwater, so what can't be signaled through commonly recognized hand motions, divers will write on a slate and pass it to one another. Shining my narrow beam onto its surface, I made out the hastily written words. Size, refrigerator, smooth black skin, dolphin-like but some humanoid features. Opposable thumbs. Chilled, I passed the slate to Todd, who read it, and after glancing worriedly toward me, tucked it away in his gear pouch. He pressed forward. As we neared the end of the tunnel, the walls began narrowing until they pressed against my shoulders. At one point it became so narrow that I had to remove my tank and pass it through the opening before trying to slither through myself. For a brief moment, I became stuck. The familiar panic set in. I took several slow breaths to calm myself. Then I exhaled every bit of air in my lungs and at last managed to become just slender enough to barely push myself through. On the other side of this obstacle, the system opened up. We found ourselves on a small ledge that dropped off into a large chamber. Shining my light through the perimeter, I noted that horizontal boundaries. Turning my narrow beam down toward what should have been the floor of the chamber, my light was snuffed out by the overwhelming blackness. To this day, I have no idea how impossibly deep it could have stretched. I settled down to the bottom of the ledge to peer over the ledge. The moment my knees touched the sand, I realized my right knee was landing on something hard. Reaching into the sand, I grabbed at it and pulled it from its burial place. It was a video camera. Clearly a high-end one, too. Whoever made it this far before must have wanted to document their expedition. Fumbling with the buttons, I switched it on and positioned my light on the playback screen so I could see the last recorded video. The video started, and I recognized the site of the obstacle we had just passed our way through. The frame reached the end of the ledge we now found ourselves on, and then began panning around the room. It's eerie to watch a video underwater. With no sound, it had all the effect of a silent horror film. The deja vu sense I had seeing the surroundings that I was currently in didn't put me at ease. The frame then panned down to the bottom of the cavern and back up from the abyss to rest on the figure of a diver positioned next to the cameraman. Clearly it was the dive buddy of whoever was shooting. The diver in the frame looked toward the camera, when suddenly a strange dark figure shot across the frame and out of view. At first the diver appeared just as he was a moment before, then he clutched his throat. He clasped both hands to his neck as if he was choking. Then wisps of dark red blood stretched out from around his grip, like malevolent fingers spreading through their reach across the dark water. The figure rocketed across the frame again from a new direction and out of sight. The diver's mask and regulator were gone now, and so was a large, haphazardly torn portion of his face. The camera frame shook in obvious shock as the blood swirled violently, dyeing the water in view. The still twitching body floated limply forward until the figure rocketed by again and it was gone, dragged down into the black. The frame peered over the ledge until it was smacked violently, and the screen turned black. Out of the silent nothingness, a roar exploded into being. Startled, I dropped the camera. To my left, Todd in a clear panicked motion to go back the way we came. Kicking with all my might, I made it back to the narrow passageway and began the arduous task of shoving myself through. Barely getting through the obstacle once again, I turned to help Todd. He passed his tank through to me, and I grab it. He fit his head, then shoulders through in a panicked hurry. His body filled up the entirety of the passageway, and I could only see his head poking out through the rocks. But before he could gain any more ground, his head jerked in a sickening way. Bubbles exploded from his regulator as he screamed in pain. Blood seeped through the opening and began staining the water around us red. Helplessly, I tried to tug him through, but as I pulled, I felt something pulling back the other way. Todd's regulator flooded the chamber with purged air bubbles as the screams of pain propelled them violently toward the roof of the tunnel. The regulator dropped from his mouth, and his head dropped lifelessly down. Horrified, I realized whatever that godforsaken thing was on the other side. The lifeless corpse of my friend was the only thing barring it from pursuing me. The aquatic roar sounded loudly as more blood poured into my side of the obstacle. I realized this was my chance. It is with shame I admit that I left my friend there so I would have time to make my escape. My heart pounded as I swam with all my might to the mouth of the cave system. Foolishly, I made an emergency ascent to the surface, not stopping to decompress. It was worth the risk of the bends just to get the hell out of that fucking water. It's been a month since then. I finally recovered from the bends after spending what felt like forever in a hyperbaric chamber. I can no longer bear the thought of swimming, let alone diving. Can't even explain why. All the proof I had of that wretched thing is buried in that cave with the body of my friend. I couldn't keep this to myself. I barely cling to my sanity as it is. I had to tell someone. Somehow. So I will post it here. Hopefully this will be a warning to all those seeking the mysteries of the deep. They said it was barely possible. A late twin. A statistical anomaly in the field of birth-giving. I was 18 and somehow I was about to have a brother who would grow to look identical to me. When he was born, I hate to say it, but I saw the similarities. Same green eyes, same tufts of dirty blonde hair, and a little skinnier than most babies. All the same, something about him seemed off. He was named Aaron, to contrast nicely with my name Eli. The day he was born, I ended up back at the hospital a couple hours later. I had gone for a bike ride later in the evening when I had lost my balance and fallen, dislocating my left arm on the pavement. It all seemed surreal. I've been biking since I was 10. Now I couldn't keep myself upright. My dad was disappointed in me, saying I was trying to steal Mom and Aaron's spotlight, as if I had fallen on purpose. Freaking hurt. In the coming weeks, I saw countless videos of Aaron's bicycle kicks going up on Facebook. Felt like he was mocking me. I hadn't been able to bike because of my arm, and here was my brother, laying on his back, spinning his legs like he was riding a bike. It made me angry in the dumbest way. My mom said it was a cute coincidence, but I just found it annoying. Things passed for the next few months fairly normally. It wasn't until little Aaron started walking that things went wrong again. I was on a jog. I've been trying to lose weight since I'm going to university next year. I ended up losing my footing and jamming my ankle in between the sidewalk and the grass. Just what I needed during summer. A sprained ankle. Now my whole family was losing it on me. Couldn't let Aaron have a victory over me. Had to have my attention. I wasn't trying to do this. I just got lost in my head while I was jogging. Got this weird feeling. Kind of like that time I tried pot with Josh back in 10th grade, just more blurry. Now as I had just escaped my sling from my arm, I now had a brace around my ankle, meaning I could only wear my dad's bulky winter coat on my left foot everywhere. More reason for people to make fun of the guy who can't bike or walk properly. It was now that it was starting to really piss me off when Aaron would waddle towards me giggling like a madman. I was struggling at school more than usual. I had already been held back once in 9th grade, but that was more for mental health reasons. I just couldn't seem to remember any of the lessons. I was failing test after test and my parents were on my back about it, whereas Aaron was doing exceptionally well, already functioning at the level of a 2-year-old. It felt like all the success I was starting to have 6 months ago was going to him. I started to worry when I was forgetting more important things. Josh and I were as close as possible, but every few days when we hung out, I was defaulting to, "Hey dude," mid-conversation. I felt like such a moron when he called me out on it. My dad said I just had a case of brain fog, whatever that meant. I wondered if this was mental health related. My grandma had started to lose things later in life. I was wondering if that was my destiny. At the same time, continued on. My mom hired me a tutor, and that seemed to be helping a little. I still struggled on the memorization portions. Seeing Aaron grow into a smaller version of me was kind of terrifying. Since he was getting hand-me-downs from me, all our baby pictures were gonna match. If I was my parents, I'd probably invest in newer clothes. Or a shittier camera. Everything was okay till yesterday. Aaron spoke his first word. Me. I've been hiding in my room since. I don't know how to tell my parents. Literally and figuratively. Aaron's stealing my memories and abilities. He's stealing my mind. He's stolen my voice.